Kelsey, welcome to DockerCon. So good to see you again.
Happy to be here.
Now, Kelsey, we've known each other for a decade now, and most of that time, we've been on this journey from microservices to Docker to Kubernetes. So I thought this might be a good time to compare notes. And there's lots of things we can talk about the future, but looking back, reflect on where we've come from as far as serving developers, meeting their needs, helping them build apps, and where you think we are today.
Yeah, I think where we are today is a very important part around getting people to agree on something. I've only seen it maybe 2 or 3 times in my whole career. Virtualization was one of them. I think the internet was another. And then since then, everyone just tried to do their own thing. If you're writing Python, you had your own package management system. If you're using Red Hat, you had your own package management system. And then Docker comes along and says, listen, we're going to take all of that stuff and give people a common container format in which to express the apps that they want, and then normalize the runtimes. Every cloud provider went from having their own unique way of doing things to now just saying, look, if you have a container, you can use any of our platforms. And that takes a lot of consensus building, especially to do it in less than a decade, to get people to universally agree on how to do something. So I think now where developers are in 2022, that idea that we can let go of some of the low-level details and just focus on what we're actually building, I think this is like one step further. So even people that are new to the ecosystem, if you just graduated 2 years ago, my guess is the first company you go to, you're probably learning about containers as the default way of doing something. That wasn't the case 10 years ago, so we're standardizing.
Yeah, no, and it is great progress, right? Because as a developer, you can build a Docker image on your Docker desktop, and you can deploy that to AWS EKS, you can deploy that to Google GKE, you can deploy that to VMware Tanzu in the data center, or Docker Engine stood up on a Linux VM, right? And as you said, like all without rebuilding, remaking the image. We still hear from developers, though, that there's still some complexity in building applications. So I think while we have this common substrate, which is fantastic, there's still some challenges in building those higher level abstractions or those higher level objects at the layers above.
Look, I come from the Kubernetes community, so I hear this complexity story a lot. And the truth is, the game is now just more complex. Your customers want 24/7 in every country in the world. That's the default now. You can't get away with like a few servers in one data center. That's out. They want a mobile app, front-end app, even a watch app. You can't get away with just the basics anymore. So there's an inherent level of complexity. I also do kind of blame, I'm a platform person. I think we leaked a little bit of our implementation details. I think the best experience that a developer could have is, I adhere to the contracts. Here's how I do logging. Here's how I do metrics. I'm going to package my app, regardless of programming language, in this thing we call a container. And ideally, if we're doing it correctly, yes, I can deploy that on a multi-region Kubernetes cluster. Yes, I can deploy this to Lambda if that's the framework that I've chosen to do that. And maybe we're going to route serverless events to it. So I think the world is going to always be complex. But I think humans are okay dealing with complexity as long as there's some guideposts, as long as there's some standards. So the way I would look at it is this way. It took me 20 years to learn all the moving parts of the Linux kernel, the bash shell, Nginx, HTTP. We had to learn so many things in the stack just to get a minimal thing done. Today, you can just say Docker run, and your thing is now running globally on some distributed container platform. That was not a possibility 10 years ago. So the way I look at it is these contracts matter. These standards are going to allow us to put the complexity where it belongs. So if you're a developer, yes, the world is complex, but it doesn't mean that you have to actually learn all of that complexity.
Right on.
And I think in 2022, this is the easiest time to kind of pull it off.
Right on, right on. Well, Kelsey, as you know, we announced Docker extensions today, and that was one of our recent investments to try to help developers in that local environment reduce the complexity, right? Because we've all seen the CNCF landscape map, and it's inspiring, but if you're a developer, it can also be intimidating or terrifying, right? Because how many boxes and logos and how many new ones every 6 months, right? And so we saw that, we heard from our developer community, and we really said, okay, what can we do in that local experience to simplify it a bit? And so Docker Extensions is our first run at that, and of course you've seen this journey as we've been building it up all along. Just let's talk about that local experience and what else can be done there for developers to simplify.
Yeah, I mean, if you're watching this and you're a developer like me, I'm old school. Vim, 10,000 command line tools, and I felt like that was the only way to be a true developer. It had to hurt. Right? If it wasn't painful, if it was too smooth, you weren't doing it right. And just 2 years ago, I started using the IDE. Like, you told me IDE 5 years ago, I'm like, you got to go turn in your developer card. Like, what are you doing clicking around on some UI? But then after a while, I started to understand that I don't have time to glue together 50,000 things to get something done. I remember using that IDE for the first time, and I copied in a piece of JSON, just text, the data interchange format. And it asked me a question: would you like me to convert this to code for you? I got up and I was like, this is what I mean by productivity. So when I look at Docker Desktop, I was one of those people that just have Docker command, build my Docker image, glue together some shell scripts, and then just put it in the corner. But the truth is, a lot of our workflows at this point require networking. If you're building applications, there's some database in the cloud that you need to hit. Extensions like Tailscale that can just kind of bridge the network from your laptop to your favorite cloud platform. Again, we're not talking about VPNs and all this weird stuff. We're talking about at the point in time that you're writing software, you usually have a task in mind. I want to connect to the database in this particular region. Not I want to install a VPN, ask my network admin to do X, Y, Z. So I think the name of the game going forward, just like we saw in the IDE space, is my developer workflow, I actually want a real experience. Not just a shell script, but a real experience. When I was coming up, I remember they would say this thing to you if they saw you kind of working inefficiently. They said, I would replace you with a shell script. That's like the worst thing you could hear. If your job could be replaced with a shell script, you had a problem. And I think these days, people will start to look at the inefficient workflows developers have and say, what if I showed you a better experience? And I think you've finally given people a framework where they actually have a nice UI to go along with that experience.
We felt similar, Kelsey, actually, about the Linux workstation experience as well, right? So as you know, Docker Desktop has been out there for years for Mac and Windows. And it lays down the substrates, it does the integration with the file system, with the networking, brings down all the open source projects around Docker Engine, Kubernetes, CLI, and then of course automatically updates them behind the scenes. And we had this impression or perception for years that, well, Linux workstation developers don't need that because they're just going to download open source and hack together whatever. But we have been pleasantly surprised with the launch today of Docker Desktop for Linux of just the overwhelming positive reception of that. And I think it's to your point that even developers using Linux as their primary workstation just want to get to work focusing on their apps and not worry about plumbing.
No, you got some hardcore Linux people out here. You know who you are.
Absolutely.
You refuse to use the UI for anything. You can't watch videos. You can't see PDFs. You're still looking at text in 80 columns. Like, the world's kind of moved on a little bit.
It's 2022.
I think we all forget, too, that things like Chromebooks are Linux machines, and those are what kids are getting in school these days, and they come with these things called UIs. And people want an experience, right? Like most people do most of their time or spend their time in a web browser. And when it comes to their application development workflows, I don't know if they're trying to drop back to a command line experience solely for something that should be like clockwork. So yeah, I'm not surprised that the Linux community is finally embracing a better UX because they've always asked for one.
We're excited by it because it helps then also those Linux workstation developers who are working together with developers who are using Mac and Windows workstations get rid of all this works on my machine type noise as well, right? So you have the same Linux kernel, you have the same Docker configuration, you have the same environment, so that apps that the Mac and Windows devs are building also run untouched on the Linux devs.
In our industry, we have this concept of the 10x engineer, right? There's always this vibe of you could hire this person, this one person, and they could work 10x faster or better than everyone else. And that was always a myth, that was always illusion. What you really want is someone that can come in and make 10 other people better at their job.
Yeah, right on.
And so if you're a system administrator and you're watching this and you're listening to this, think about what it would mean to get the workflow right once, right? Any organization that's learning, your job is that when you hire that next person, imagine a world where you say, hey, if you just do this, you're ready to go. Everything we've learned in the last decade is right here in this extension, and it will guide you to success. You don't have to spend the next 2 months trying to figure out how we do things. We've taken care of that for you. So I think that's what most people are looking for going forward.
Yeah, right on, right on. You know, let's go back to the contracts for a second, Kelsey, because I think you and I both seen, in the past, we've seen failures when those contracts don't hold up, right? And so we saw what happened with the Unix wars, where an application built for Solaris was not going to run on HPUX, was not going to run on AIX, right? And we've also, unfortunately, we saw what happened with Linux, where an app written for Red Hat RHEL is not going to run on Ubuntu, not going to run on SUSE, right? I think we're very fortunate as a community right now that we have contracts that are being respected, that are being adhered to. So we have this flexibility. We have the tremendous choice for developers. If you look forward, and there's a number of new technologies that are also starting to use the OCI Docker container image format. It's interesting what's happening there, and I wonder if we as a community kind of appreciate that and can retain these contracts or respect these contracts. And I'm talking about things like WASM, which is starting to use Docker OCI container images. The serverless functions as a service are also trying to use Docker OCI images for their local interloop development. You see a lot, Kelsey, so curious kind of as you look in the future, but how do we as a community retain these contracts and get the benefit from that?
I think there's a bit of context required. You know, me and Scott used to work at Puppet Labs a decade ago.
Decade ago. I had less hair.
Yeah.
You had about the same hair.
Yeah, we're catching up. 10 years ago, I remember working in configuration as management space, and the saying was infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
And I remember when Docker came out, we all watched Solomon give the 5-minute lightning talk at PyCon, and we all looked at it and it was like, what is that? Why is that important? And how would you express it as infrastructure as code? But we were all missing something because back then, all we did was go from shell scripts to higher level languages, but no new abstractions. We were all just fighting Red Hat versus Ubuntu with if statements. And we just wrote all of this code, and it became a mess, to be honest. And I was very surprised that the platform folks, the people that were doing DevOps, the people that were doing infrastructure as code never stopped for a moment to say, why are we fighting the system so much? How come we don't invent a new system? And so Docker came out with this abstraction that says, crazy enough, not replace everything.
Right.
It was, here's how you organize everything. That Docker file was the thing that made it click for me. If you were using Red Hat package managers before, RPM install, yum install, put those lines in a Docker file. But the thing we're going to do different, though, is to say, we're going to normalize all the other languages into one common format and then standardize the interfaces.
Yeah.
Right? Because think about what you're doing. You write code and you put it on a server. I would like to think there's more than that, but that's kind of what you're doing. And when we gave a common interface to that, then it clicked for people. This whole Docker build, Docker run, Docker pull, that was pretty much the steps that most people needed. Going forward, what we're seeing now is a standardization of all the other things, like logging.
Yeah.
How complex should logging be, right? Something went wrong, you let people know. You put it somewhere, and the people who can fix it look there. We don't need innovation at the logging area.
Right.
And the same thing is true for metrics. You see things like Prometheus. So I think as a developer now, it's getting much easier to say, listen, here's my application. Here's how you get metrics out of it. Here's how you get logs out of it. And here's the type of data that I expect. Once you have that, I think now you start to see serverless platforms say, yeah, maybe that should be the contract. Does it have to be so rigid? Is there a big difference between an app and a function? Those are frameworks at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting back to the base fundamentals. When I was learning all of this stuff, there was two things. There's data and there's algorithms. That's it. Everything else is just to get those two things to connect to each other. Maybe, just maybe, if we continue down this path, most developers can just get back to that motion, and then when the thing you wrote is ready, you're going to package in a standard format and give it to the best platform that you need to run it.
So you're hopeful. You're hopeful, it sounds like, that we've learned a lot these last, call it 10 years, about the benefits of standardization, the benefits of simplifying.
Or it's going to collapse on its own complexity. The number of teams I meet, I won't mention any names, and they'll say, Kelsey, we're going to show you our Kubernetes stack. And like 20 minutes later, they're like at piece number 275. And I'm like who's going to maintain all of this? Like, why are you doing this? And so I think they're asking themselves, why am I rebuilding the same platforms over and over? So I think at some point, it's got to happen. We saw it with email. We saw it with CDNs. I was there back in the Real Player days. People may not remember Real Player. But if you had a video, you want to stream it to the world, you got a server, you install Real Player, and you can stream to like 7 people. So you like tell your mom, stop watching the video. I need space for someone else.
Right.
And that's all you could do. But these days, we would laugh. You upload a video now, the whole world can stream it at the same time in high resolution for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you standardize. You get to level the whole field up, and actually move much faster than everyone trying to build their own Rube Goldberg machines. So it's got to happen.
Love that. Love that. Level the whole field up. Everyone moves faster. Even as the market keeps growing, right? Like 26 million developers this year, going to 45 million developers this decade. Like, let's have them all move fast.
And use Docker.
Well, we'd like them to use Docker as well. Get the benefits of Docker. That's right. That's right. Well, Kelsey, some of the innovations we announced this morning were a result of our evolving business model, our ability to take the success and invest in more engineers, pull forward our roadmap, invest in more experiences for developers. Now, you've been with us on this journey, and you've also seen many other communities go through these transitions. And we acknowledge, we've talked about, it was a challenge these last 2.5 years to go from focused on ops and sysadmins and production and clusters to focused on developers. And okay, we need to find a working business model to allow and provide and sustain the company, to provide a sustainable Docker. And so let's talk about like some of the trade-offs you've seen organizations make, and we can talk about our trade-offs as well and how to find that balance between enabling developers, helping them move forward, move fast, try things out, but also having a sustainable, scalable business.
Yeah, I think this one should be personal to all developers. I've been an open source maintainer of projects that I've started to scratch a personal itch. Like, put the commercial side stuff down for a second.
Yeah.
When you wake up on a Saturday morning and you have a popular open source project, what you wake up to is a bunch of issues from big companies, small companies, individuals wanting new features. And you just don't have time for all of that. You can't satisfy all this stuff. It isn't sustainable. And for a long time in the open source community, we've been asking questions around, how do we keep this stuff sustainable? Software can't be free forever, not maintained software, not software that gets new features. I haven't met a professional developer yet that works for free.
What?
Yeah, I haven't met that yet. Someone asked me to do that.
You're not working for free?
No, I couldn't do that.
Oh, man.
My wife would probably have a problem too. And so when I think about sustainability, you got to ask yourself, the difference between the community and the customer is one group is willing to pay for the sustainability of these projects. And so when we think about what goes into a successful community, number one, the whole Docker captains, the global meetups, that is a good example of community and knowledge sharing that money can never buy that.
Right on.
That's right on. But when it comes to security fixes, the boring stuff like integrating between the different versions of Mac OS and when they change the hypervisor interface, someone has to do that work. The amount of skill required and patience required to do that work is not something that you want to rely 100% on a volunteer effort. You just can't. It's not sustainable. So I think what we have to ask ourselves is if we want real sustainable communities, you as a company, as a developer, you're going to have to vote with your actual dollars. Contributions are great, but if you want sustainability, then that's going to have to be your other side of that equation. But I remember my feedback to you was, you got to give people something they're willing to pay for. It can't just be the same thing that I can download from GitHub, because then it gets real confusing, right? The free thing looks like the pay for thing. It's just going to be a problem. And so seeing the roadmap evolve, just like any other service that I pay for, I'm always smiling when I'm feeling like I'm getting a good deal. So I think that's the other side of the equation. And seeing that roadmap gives people something that they're willing to pay for.
Yeah, no, it's been a journey, right? And it's never a straight line, but the 2.5 years of exploring that with the community, with advisors, with customers, it's been eye-opening. We haven't made all the right moves, and the community's been very, very transparent with us when we haven't. But I like to think we're listening in our public roadmap, on social media, and we're listening and we take action when we've misstepped. And I think that's one of the things that is often lost from the outside, that no one has a perfect crystal ball. No one has a perfect, predictable model of where the market's going. So as long as you're open, humble, listen, put things out there, and listen to your community, listen to your customers, you're gonna iterate and evolve in the right direction. Maybe not 100% in the right direction, but you'll be 80%,
so I have
90%.
A question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Look, Docker has the opportunity at this point to work on anything. And they say focus requires saying no to great ideas.
Yep.
What's the one great idea that's on the table that you consciously had to say no to?
So I'll share an idea that's on the table. And we'll let everyone discuss how great or not it is. But what we've seen, and this is what we love about developers, and our customers are so creative, and we'll keep names out of this, but we've seen a customer take Docker Desktop, which was intended for a developer, interaction, right? So a human being kind of working with Docker Desktop to build their application. And the customer took Docker Desktop and embedded it in their elevator control system. And so Docker Desktop is there responsible for moving elevators up and down skyscrapers.
So 30 flights
30
could
flights
go wrong and we're done.
And then your Kubernetes certificate times out, right? So again, it's a great example of creativity of developers, the innovation that customers are driving, but that's one of those that we are probably not going to ship Docker Desktop for running elevators, not this year.
And I think you speak to a big gap that the industry is seeing, is that now that we have this agreement on a packaging format, naturally people want to use that packaging format everywhere.
So flexible, right?
So we've seen mobile space kind of level up. There's a common way to deploy software to the mobile space. We've seen the server side, cloud, serverless, all the way down to VMs, also adopt a standard.
Yeah.
But there's this kind of missing component, which is kind of the edge, the IoT space. They're still out there with custom tooling. They're looking at things like Kubernetes, the Docker daemon, and they're trying to figure out, how do we take that and level up to the same experience that we have in the mobile world?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And how to make developers productive, focused on, again, the contract that is already agreed upon, the tooling that's there for the contract. But then those developers can build an object that gets deployed to a machine tool, right? Or deployed to an elevator that's going to run 24/7 applications, or deployed to a tractor that's out in the field, right? And so the really interesting thing is the programmability of all these devices on the edge can be done back to the developer with the same set of tools, the same contracts and formats. Those are wonderful businesses out there that Docker's focused on developers. Others will find great opportunities in scaling.
So there's your startup idea. You're trying to raise capital, real-time runtime,
there you go.
supporting Docker images on elevators.
Elevators, tractors, microwaves.
Got it.
Everything. Kelsey, this is a developer conference for developers by developers, and you yourself have been very active in communities for more than a decade. And while we're celebrating 8 years of DockerCons, we also recognize with the pandemic and changes in how people expect their workplace environment, like, there is no new normal yet. Like, we're all still winding our way through and looking for, okay, what is my role with my company? What is my role with my community? How do I feel about my physical environment and my virtual environment? And so just as we think about winding down our talk here and think about the developers listening to us today, what's been your experience as communities evolve, as this new normal is not yet the normal? And what words would you give them to kind of give them a positive way to kind of look forward, think forward, and think about the coming years, which are very uncertain for many of us?
Yeah, I would say mid-career for me. I'm working in the enterprise setting, financial institution this time. You know, you got to wear the shirt and tie, jeans on Friday. And it's just another job in the belt, job number 6 for me at that time. And you go into this war room, so something's down, there's an outage, and you go in this war room, and it's the same actors every single time, checking the same logs. The error isn't there. They know that, but you got to look busy. Got the CEO on the bridge, breathing real funny, asking, is it fixed yet? And you're like, 200 more hours, and it'll be there. And so we're just looking at this screen. There are things turning green, some things are turning red. And the things that are turning red is the result of payments being declined. And so we were in the prepaid business, but we were also in the credit card business and government assistance. So for people that need food assistance, you get this EBT card. It's so you can buy things like groceries, for your family and your kids. And so we're in this room, and people are just taking their sweet time. This is probably the 3rd outage this month. And it's just like routine clockwork. You're just sitting there going through the motions. You're a Linux system administrator too. You're a DBA, and you just play your role, and eventually the system will fix itself. And the CTO walks in, and he says, hey, while you all are just kind of meandering around, each of those red entries that are showing up on the dashboard represents someone in the grocery store with their whole family trying to buy groceries. And if you ever bought groceries before, there's a long line of people, impatient, ready to get out of there. And here you are swiping at the terminal, and all it says is decline. He reminded us, unlike our other customers, this person doesn't have another form of payment. This is all they have. And so their only option is to leave all of those groceries there. Half of them are now bagged, and their credit card has declined because we can't figure out what the actual mission was. We weren't just working at a financial institution. We weren't just working on a payments platform or Nagios or Oracle database. We were a group of people that were trying to build a system to support another group of people.
Right.
So during the pandemic, I think a lot of us went through a lot of things that are human related. And being away from our support systems, some people, your friends were at work. Your colleagues were at work. That's what you did after work. And so sitting there in front of the screen, it kind of dehumanized the whole process even further. You already had the tight deadlines. Now you don't even get to see the person and get that additional context that's missing from that particular Google Doc in which you got the instructions on what to build next. So I think as a community, we have to remind ourselves just how important the community was. We took it for granted that you can go at any given month to a meetup and see people who shared experiences, shared problem sets, willing to train each other. That all went away in an instant.
Right.
I think it was cool for that first 6 weeks because we thought it was just going to be 6 weeks. Some people thought it was going to be 6 months, and now here we are. We're 3 years in. So I think a lot of times what we have to do as a community is remind ourselves is that people over technology always. There are people who were hired during the pandemic. You haven't even met your colleagues yet. You haven't even gotten your work laptop yet because of the supply chain. But you also didn't get the context is, what are we actually doing? What is this business here to do? What is it designed to do? Who are the customers? What do they look like? What are their experiences? So I think we just got to remind ourselves to take that opportunity to be human again. And the minute you do get a chance to organize yourselves again, that first team offsite, don't pack the schedule. Leave some time for people just to sit around and get to remind themselves what it's like to be human again. And then I think that will translate itself into better work, better productivity, and better collaboration that led to all of these great tools we have now, right? They didn't get invented by themselves. They got invented beyond collaboration.
By teams of people.
By teams of people.
Working together, focused on their customer. I love it. People over technology, always. Kelsey, it's a privilege and a joy to be on this journey with you this last decade. I'm looking forward to another decade together. Thanks so much for joining us at DockerCon.
Thanks for having me.